Crowdfunding for GoldenFox Pictures is supported by my patrons, including Science Steel Rail, Jack Foley, Courtney Bright, and Thomas Fan 3751. Thank you all for your support. And to all my viewers, I hope you enjoy this video.
When you first asked me to help you develop new skills, I thought, working with young students so devoted to the joy of learning purely for its own sake? What could be better? You all remind me of myself when I was your age.
There's a possible theory that with the restoration of the Sisters' Castle, Twilight could rule over it and have something in mind for the young fillies. I could be overanalyzing this, but if this were the case, I would definitely be up for that, passing her knowledge to one another and encouraging it.
The School of Friendship, first day of class. Will we fail or will we pass? Students come from far and wide, brand new friends here by us.
Wow! Twilight wasn't kidding about helping out young fillies when she said so back in Twilight time. I should mention, however, that my expectations on this idea were different. Based on the interaction between her and the CMC in that episode, I was under the impression that she would assist with them amongst the majority of the series in getting their cutie marks. But seeing what Crusaders of the Lost Mark has established, we can simply throw that thought out the window. Nevertheless, I was still open to the idea of having Twilight pass her knowledge of friendship with others. It was shown in some episodes, such as Luna Eclipse, when Twilight was sharing her knowledge of friendship with Luna in her trials and errors. Same thing with her friends, such as Pinkie Pie talking to Gilda in The Lost Treasure of Griffinstone. A lot of which makes sense within her character, and not just making a toy playset. But not only does Twilight come up with the school about friendship, but she plans on passing those said friendship lessons to other races who have yet to learn with others. This is definitely walking on eggshells when compared to our real-life society, but it's also a really exciting idea to have other races get to know each other, especially since the show is so minimal in world building. The episode is a debate that is held between Twilight and the EEA, which is short abbreviated for Equestria Education Association. It is controlled by Chancellor Naysay, and he's not very fond of the idea. This is what makes the episode comparable to our real-life counterpart, or how some of us would be able to connect. I immediately had the impression that this was a commentary or jab at our educational system, and based on how controversial we feel about it, this episode's presentation isn't too far off. It's actually quite in your face. I do remember Eliora mentioning our educational system before when we both reviewed Testin' 123 together, and by conveniently bringing this up, that episode's lesson was that there's more than one way of learning, and that it was dedicated to the writer's kid who suffered a learning disability. And it makes sense because we all have trouble in how we learn since we're different from each other. Taking this lesson into account, it seems School Daze was putting that lesson to the test to an extent, as well as be comparable to our educational system. Throughout the episode, Twilight constantly states that everything has to be done by the book from the EEA in order to keep the school accredited. And what the book says, well, we're just showing a classroom stereotype that everyone hates. It's even an issue with the main six when they had their own methods of teaching. Even though it's established that this is a friendship school compared to a regular school, we still take this very issue in our society where most of our system is very mechanical and has relied so heavily from the sources and methods that are centuries old. We all sit at a desk most of the day and listen to someone talk to everyone in a classroom. And to be blunt, we inadvertently forget most of what education we are given in our later years, partially because of this. They don't seem as memorably impacting. I forgot most of what I've learned, mostly because of that. Most of the subjects, however, are still important to be taught. Science prepares us on what materials to work with. History teaches us the value and progress of our kind, along with what crucial mistakes to identify with and prevent. Health teaches us on what to be mindful of and prepare for any sickness we may encounter. English extends our communication skills, and math exercises our way of thinking. However, because everyone is so different in their line of thinking, it's just as important for how someone learns something. This is the case when the main 6 share their way of teaching, and it's been made clear that the students are having fun in what they learn. I firmly believe that experience has a greater way of learning than just sitting down and being lectured in a classroom. And seeing what the main 6 and students are dealing with, we share their feelings. That being said, I can also take pity with Twilight as she admits her faults in part 2. By sticking with the EEA guidelines as a requirement, her focus on that was her undoing as she was ignoring on what the main 6 were dealing with. The school means a lot to her, and she doesn't want it to fall apart. So when it does, it hurts, but it also shows the errors of her ways and what she must overcome if she wants to make the school work. This is also with the help of Starlight Glimmer as she shows a bit of tough love and rebellion as she rids the EEA guidebook.
But the EEA rulebook doesn't matter.
Seriously, that was such a glorious moment. Glimmer has earned my respect for that. But that does come down to what Twilight faces, naysay. I'm gonna be brutally honest and say that he was too demonized. I get that he's the episode's antagonist and resembles the negative end of what's comparatively wrong with the educational system, but his character is so easy to play up the devil's advocate when looking at the circumstances of the other races in the show. Up until To Where and Back Again, the Changelings were terrorists when ruled by Chrysalis. The Yaks were very destructive to where their leader declared war. The Griffins were in ruins because of their selfish pride. Queen Novo refused to help the main 6 when they reached the Hippogriffs for help. And the dragons? I think their destructive behavior can speak for itself. He basically finds them threatening in his eyes, and this would have been a good opportunity for him to show his insecurity about the safety of Equestria. But while the part of that is still there, saying it's for the greater good, his dismissive behavior is for the most part coming off as xenophobic. He isn't very sympathetic at all, which makes the conflict too black and white. By having a controversial topic over something like having a unique school for the individuality, it's just as important to make the conflict of two ends properly balanced. As a result, this weakens the commentary. To his credit, we do see that Naysay leaves with his obligation in accepting Twilight's decision and promise. Plus, I do love the comeback Celestia makes.
Allowing all of these creatures to attend your school, changing the rules for them, it simply won't work.
I seem to recall something about Earth ponies, unicorns, and Pegasi doing something similar. Don't you?
So, by having the school be for various races, we're introduced to a new set of students. Sandbar, Gallus, Yona, Smolder, Ocellus, and Silverstream. For how we know about them are only at first glance, making their personalities very minimal. However, they do offer a sense of fun with each other. More often than not, I was more interested in these characters than the conflict Twilight was dealing with. That doesn't necessarily negate the episode's conflict. In fact, it's what helped Twilight in having other races befriend each other and putting aside their differences. I was feeling very happy and joyful with these students whenever they interacted with each other. They gave me that same vibe I had with those movies that centered on kids who dealt with major conflicts, such as The Goonies, Stranger Things, and 2017's It. One of the most adorable moments was when they camped out at the Two Sisters Castle. It seemed equivalent to having a clubhouse or a sleepover. Ugh, my heart. Breaking down each of the characters, some of whom are a bit of a cookie cutter of the main 6. For instance, Ocellus is shy and Silverstream is pink with a joyful personality. Gee, doesn't that sound familiar? This has been very noticeable whenever DHX wrote a new pack of characters or so whereabouts. In Pinky's family, Marble is shy, and in Littlest Pet Shop, a monkey named Mika Mark is also colored pink with an overjoyed personality. Again, does that sound familiar? That being said though, I do have to take into account with their circumstances of what brings their personalities forth. The Hippogriffs have been preservably sealed away in an underwater cavern to the point where they know little of other races, so it makes sense as to why Silverstream is very excited to see other races. Also, her reactions in finding stairs in part 2 adds more weight in regards to her culture. Ocellus and the Changelings have been more peace-driven to the point where they're indefensive. Neither her or the Changelings want to cause any more trouble. Plus, she's been the most helpful with the rest of her colleagues, as she's the one who helped them ditch school and share her knowledge to them on a pack of creatures they encounter called Puckwudgies. Sandbar seemed a bit underwhelming of a character as an Earth pony to be part of a new group. I get that he supposedly resembles the audience as he's the voice of reason to them, as well as having the connection from the audience to the other races so that the group won't feel too alienating. But it also undermines the possibility of other races. That's not to say that Sandbar is a bad character. Given that we were just introduced to these students, that would have been too unfair. To his credit, I like how laid back he is compared to others, and he's what inadvertently leads the main six into finding the rest of the other students after running away in part 2. Smolder and Gallus seem to come off as the same to me with their personality. They're both competitive, rebellious, and they don't put up with anyone's bullshit. And if anything, they're very remindful of the competitive nature with Applejack and Rainbow Dash back in the earlier seasons. Again, this is the fault of the cultures they're based on, and it's what brings their personalities forth. The dragons have always been competitive prior to Ember's reign, and the griffins have been so prideful and selfish. Now, by saying that, I don't mean to dismiss their own sense of kindness to others, especially given what they do to the rest of the students. And last but not least, there's Yona. The first time I saw her, I was hesitant of having a yak for a student. But given that she's young and has much to learn, I see her as a good potential and grown up to be a better yak, if not a better ruler. I've had issues with the yaks before in the show because of how destructive they were in Party Poop, and how prideful Prince Rutherford was in the very episode Not Asking for Trouble. He chose his own pride over the virtues of his own kind. The other race has had some interactions before, such as Triple Threat, but Rutherford has hardly interacted before. So with Yona, I see her as hope for the better of her kind. Not to mention, her braids were adorable and are gladly fixed at the end of the episode so that way she wouldn't come off as clumsy. So yeah, I enjoy all these characters despite their shortcomings. So for anything that's left in this episode, the scene before the opening gives a nice mention to the events in the movie and confirming where the movie takes place in the show's timeline. This is nice on the surface, but it does question the presence of Starlight and Discord in the contribution. I know that this is unfair since the movie was written and was in production long before Starlight was around, but given the circumstances, that kind of question is bound to happen. Also, it's disappointing that Tempest Shadow wasn't seen since Twilight stated that she's busy all over Equestria. The immediate impression that I have is that we won't be able to see her in the show at all, but that's only the worst at thought. A part of me isn't too surprised about that either since Emily Blunt has a lot on her plate, especially playing the role of Mary Poppins. And I'm not sure if replacing her voice would be a good idea either. Lastly, I thought the songs in this episode were very lackluster. There didn't seem to be anything catchy or magical about them. All they were there for was just to express excitement of having the school in the first place, with dialogue being exchanged for lyrics. These songs aren't bad, but they're really not that great either. You could take them out and still show what happens next in the story. All things considered, for how this two-parter holds up, I still think it does a good job on the surface, but there are a few things that needed to be tweaked for the better. It doesn't hold up as my favorite premiere as Princess Twilight Sparkle of the Cutie Map does, but it's definitely an interesting one. The direction is dramatically different, but in a sense where it's not too far off, and it does create excitement on what to look forward to. Hopefully with the student characters, this will allow more world building with other cultures to a proper degree compared to the many complaints that I've heard with Season 7. And with the idea of having a school for other races, I hope to see something more like with zebras, anthrocats, and parrots. That would be nice to have one day, but that's only wishful thinking. And no, I don't expect that answer to be in the IDW comics. That's a cop-out. But that'll be open for another video. But until next time, this is GoldenFox, and take care.